In the rising sun, the hum deepens into a roar, shaking the ground beneath. Japanese sentries glance upward, fingers tightening around rifles. Anti-aircraft guns rattle nervously, though the crews know they are outmatched. Down below, civilians clutch children, praying for mercy. Soldiers brace behind sandbags, hearts pounding. There is no warning beyond the growing drone of engines and the glint of sunlight off aluminum wings. Then the first bombs streak across the sky, trailing fire and smoke. Trees snap, buildings crumble. Okinawa was being reshaped, not by hand, but by precision, speed, and relentless determination. In that moment, the island knew nothing would be the same. The Americans had arrived, and they had come with a plan that would leave the Japanese stunned. January 1945, the Pacific War had reached a brutal crescendo. From the coral reefs of the Solomon Islands to the volcanic sands of Iwo Jima, the United States had clawed its way across the Pacific, island by island, each battle a testament to fire, steel, and unyielding resolve. Okinawa, the largest of the Ryukyu Islands, lay like a jagged crown off the southern tip of Japan's home islands. Its capture was no longer a strategic choice, it was an imperative. For the Japanese, Okinawa was more than a foothold. It was the final shield for the home islands. Tens of thousands of soldiers, sailors, and civilian militia had been stationed across the island's ridges and caves. The Japanese Army and Navy had fortified positions with painstaking care. Hills were transformed into concrete bunkers. Valleys became labyrinths of trenches. Each village, each coastal bluff had been studied for its defensive potential. Even civilians were pressed into service, carrying supplies, digging foxholes, and forming human barricades. There was a grim understanding among the defenders. The battle to come would be their last or their end. Across the vast Pacific, the United States had learned from every confrontation. The brutal lessons of Tarawa, Saipan, and Iwo Jima had shaped a new doctrine of air-ground coordination. Intelligence from intercepted communications, aerial reconnaissance, and captured documents revealed the depth of Japanese fortifications on Okinawa. The U.S. Air Forces under General Henry H. Hap Arnold and the U.S. Navy's carrier groups had meticulously mapped the island. The plan was audacious: strike with overwhelming precision, neutralize airfields, supply depots, and troop concentrations before the ground invasion began. The technological edge was unmistakable. The B-29 Superfortress, a bomber designed for high-altitude precision, could carry up to 20,000 pounds of bombs over 3,000 miles. Its radar-guided targeting system allowed strikes in poor visibility, giving the Americans an unprecedented advantage. The Japanese, in contrast, relied on antiquated radar, flak guns, and the fanatical bravery of kamikaze pilots to defend an island under siege. The disparity was stark. As January drew on, reconnaissance planes traced patterns over the island. Maps were cross-referenced. Bomb loads were calculated to the pound. Pilots and crews ran through endless drills, studying terrain photographs and simulating bombing runs over the deserts of New Mexico. Meanwhile, on Okinawa, Japanese officers tightened their defensive perimeters. Soldiers checked artillery, anti-aircraft guns, and ammunition. Civilians buried themselves in cave networks, listening to distant hums that hinted at the arrival of something far larger than a single plane. By late January 1945, Okinawa transformed into a fortress, a patchwork of natural defenses and man-made fortifications. The Japanese 32nd Army under Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima had deployed over 90,000 soldiers across the island. Infantry units sprawled along ridges and valleys, artillery crews manned reinforced bunkers, and specialized engineering units had tunneled deep into limestone cliffs. Anti-aircraft batteries, often camouflaged with netting and foliage, bristled across the plains and coasts. The defenders were well prepared, but not for what was coming.
Japanese intelligence had glimpsed hints of American capability from previous campaigns. They knew the B-29 was fast, high-flying, and heavily armed, but they underestimated the precision these bombers could achieve. Many officers clung to the belief that terrain and kamikaze attacks would blunt the American offensive. Their defensive doctrine emphasized attrition and the psychological impact of relentless resistance. Civilians were indoctrinated with loyalty to the emperor and the imperative to fight to the death, contributing labor and, in some cases, human shields to fortifications.
On the American side, the preparation was meticulous. The U.S. 5th Air Force and 20th Air Force, in coordination with naval intelligence, conducted detailed reconnaissance. Aerial photography captured every ridgeline, every village, every airfield. Analysts cross-referenced Japanese troop movements with intercepted radio communications. This intelligence allowed American planners to design bombing runs that would strike precisely at supply depots, barracks, and command centers while minimizing redundancy. Technological readiness amplified the Americans' advantage. The B-29 Superfortress, equipped with the latest Norden bombsights and radar navigation systems, could conduct high-altitude, pinpoint bombing even under cloud cover. Bombs were chosen for effect, a combination of high-explosive and incendiary ordnance designed to obliterate structures and disrupt defensive positions. Coordination between the Army Air Forces and the Navy meant that aerial attacks would complement naval bombardments and isolate the island from reinforcement or resupply. Meanwhile, training and timing were critical. Crews rehearsed for weeks in simulated conditions, practicing formation flying, synchronized bombing, and evasive maneuvers. Weather reports were analyzed hourly. Mission planners calculated wind, humidity, and the angle of the sun to maximize bomb accuracy. Each detail was part of a larger calculus. The Americans intended not merely to weaken Okinawa's defenses, but to decisively disrupt them before a single ground soldier stepped onto the island in force. By the end of January, the stage was set. The Japanese defenders, despite their courage and preparation, faced a threat unlike any they had encountered. The Americans were not coming with scattershot raids, they were coming with precision, calculating, relentless, and technologically superior. The island braced for fire from the sky, and its people would soon witness destruction on an unprecedented scale. From this preparation emerges the multiple angles of the campaign: the human experience, tactical decisions, technological innovations, and leadership choices that shaped the bombing of Okinawa. For the civilians of Okinawa, the war had become an unrelenting shadow. Families had dug into caves and hollowed out rock formations, trying to shield themselves from artillery and air raids that had already scarred the island. Yet nothing had prepared them for the scale and precision of the American bombing. From the first roar of the B-29 engines, panic surged. Children clung to mothers' skirts, eyes wide with fear. Elders whispered prayers to ancestors, their voices barely audible over the hum of approaching bombers. Every explosion reshaped the landscape, collapsing homes and fields, sending shockwaves through communities. Ordinary people became invisible collateral, their lives swept up in a campaign designed with military objectives in mind, but impossible to separate from human suffering. Even soldiers noticed. The cries of civilians mingled with the chaos of war, adding a weight that no map or plan could account for. Leadership angle. On the American side, leadership was methodical, precise, and relentless. General Curtis LeMay, overseeing strategic bombing operations, had studied every detail of the island. He demanded flawless execution from bomber crews, emphasizing timing, altitude, and coordination. The plan was not to terrorize, but to incapacitate, to render Japanese defensive positions untenable before the ground invasion. Commanders calculated risk meticulously, knowing that the success of the Okinawa campaign hinged on neutralizing airfields, artillery, and troop concentrations quickly.
Conversely, Japanese leaders faced impossible choices. Lieutenant General Ushijima and his staff attempted to predict American strikes, moving units into concealed positions and relying on camouflage and terrain. Yet intelligence limitations and over-reliance on traditional defensive strategies left them vulnerable. The leadership gap between the attackers and defenders was stark, measured both in technology and the ability to adapt in real time to the aerial onslaught. Tactically, the Americans approached Okinawa as a laboratory of precision warfare. Bombing runs were synchronized to the minute, often coordinated with naval gunfire and fighter sweeps. The choice of targets reflected careful prioritization. Airfields first, to prevent Japanese aircraft from launching counterattacks. Supply depots next, to cut off reinforcements. And finally, defensive positions, which included fortifications, artillery emplacements, and entrenched infantry. Formation flying allowed bombers to maximize coverage while minimizing exposure to anti-aircraft fire. Radar navigation ensured accuracy even through clouds or smoke, a technology that Japanese gunners could scarcely counter. Each mission was rehearsed, mapped, and timed to the second. On the ground, defenders scrambled, attempting to move troops or camouflage installations, but every adjustment was anticipated by aerial reconnaissance, leaving Japanese forces trapped in a deadly cycle of reaction rather than initiative. From the trembling civilians to meticulous American planners, and from Japanese command attempts to the choreography of bombing runs, these angles reveal the complex human and operational landscape. Yet technological innovation and enemy response created a layered story, one that would only deepen as the campaign intensified.
The B-29 Superfortress represented the apex of wartime aviation technology. With a wingspan of 141 feet and the ability to fly above 30,000 feet, it could deliver massive payloads with unprecedented precision. Its Norden bombsight, combined with radar guidance, allowed crews to strike targets that were previously unreachable or obscured by clouds. The Americans employed high explosive ordnance to destroy fortifications and incendiary bombs to ignite structures and supply lines. Night operations leveraged radar targeting to extend pressure on Japanese positions, a tactic that left defenders disoriented and unable to predict the timing or location of attacks. In effect, the sky itself became a weapon, converting altitude, speed, and electronics into tools of tactical domination. The technological edge was decisive. Even the most fortified Japanese positions could be neutralized without direct ground engagement, reshaping the battlefield before soldiers ever arrived. From the Japanese standpoint, the bombing was a shock that few could fully comprehend. Anti-aircraft batteries, often concentrated around key installations, opened fire on incoming formations, but their reach was limited. The speed and altitude of B-29s rendered most flak ineffective. Kamikaze pilots, previously a psychological weapon against carriers and naval fleets, were unable to significantly impact the aerial assault over land. Commanders moved troops into concealed positions, camouflaged bunkers, and decoy installations, but every move was countered by reconnaissance. Morale frayed under the relentless skyward threat. Soldiers, trained for conventional engagements and human-scale combat, struggled to cope with the destruction raining from above, often feeling powerless against the invisible hand of American precision. In their reports, Japanese officers would later describe a sense of disbelief. Entire towns and strongholds obliterated in minutes, defying expectations and shaking confidence in their defensive doctrine. The human toll of precision bombing, though calculated, was devastating. Civilians caught in the crossfire endured trauma and loss on a scale that statistics alone cannot convey. Villages burned, crops were destroyed, and the psychological impact lingered long after the planes departed. For American planners, the ethical calculus was clear: minimize their own casualties and disable enemy capacity swiftly. For the Japanese, it was a moral crucible, sacrificing lives to protect the homeland while facing an overwhelming technological onslaught.
The moral dimension extended beyond immediate loss. It reshaped the perception of warfare itself, where strategy and technology could inflict catastrophic damage without direct confrontation, challenging traditional notions of honor, valor, and proportionality in battle. Across technology, enemy experience, and ethical considerations, these angles converge to show the multidimensional nature of the Okinawa campaign. The island became a crucible where human courage, strategic planning, and mechanized precision collided, setting the stage for the decisive climax that would determine the outcome of the air campaign. February 24, 1945. Dawn barely touched the horizon, yet the sky over Okinawa was already alive with movement. Hundreds of B-29 Superfortresses cut through the mist, their silver fuselages reflecting the pale light. Crews in the cockpits adjusted altitude and heading with surgical precision, guided by radar and carefully timed coordinates. Below, the Japanese defenders braced for impact, unaware that the full force of the American plan was about to be unleashed. The first wave struck the airfields with devastating accuracy. Shuri, Naha, and Yantan, key hubs for Japanese aircraft and supply, were flattened within minutes. Bombs fell in calculated patterns, leaving craters, firestorms, and twisted metal. Runways were torn apart, hangars reduced to skeletal frames. The destruction was total, yet orderly, a testament to the planning and coordination that had preceded the attack. Japanese pilots on the ground watched helplessly as planes that could not be intercepted dismantled the very infrastructure they relied on. In the valleys and hills, infantry units scrambled to react. Machine gun nests, artillery positions, and command bunkers were hit in synchronized waves. Soldiers attempted to regroup, moving along tunnels and makeshift paths, but every movement was anticipated by reconnaissance and follow-up strikes. Explosions echoed through the ridges, shaking the earth and shattering the calm of the early morning. Civilians cowered in caves, the smoke curling upward like a living entity. Even the most fortified positions were compromised, demonstrating the terrifying reach of high-altitude precision bombing. Above, bomber crews communicated in clipped tones over intercoms. Each run had been rehearsed countless times, yet the moment of execution brought a mixture of tension and focus. Bombsights were aligned, altitudes corrected for wind drift. Every release was the culmination of meticulous planning, every explosion a proof of technological supremacy. The Americans had not merely struck, they had orchestrated a symphony of destruction, targeting the heart of Japanese capability on Okinawa.
The first wave concluded, leaving the island scarred. Fires burned unchecked. Communications were severed, and Japanese defenses were thrown into disarray. Reports from the field described stunned soldiers who had trained for conventional defense, now witnessing the overwhelming power of air superiority. This was not random bombing, it was precision warfare executed to perfection. Yet this was only the beginning. Subsequent waves would push the Japanese defenses to the brink, cementing the Americans' dominance in the air and setting the stage for the full-scale devastation of Okinawa. By late February, the American bombing campaign escalated into relentless waves. Each day brought new sorties, timed with military precision, each targeting Japanese positions with deadly accuracy. The B-29s struck in succession, first the airfields, then supply depots, artillery positions, and troop concentrations. Fires raged across the island, smoke rising in towering plumes visible from miles away, turning the once green landscape into a landscape of ash and ruin. Japanese commanders attempted to respond. Anti-aircraft batteries opened fire, their shells streaking toward the high-flying bombers, but few found their mark. The speed, altitude, and coordination of the B-29s rendered most countermeasures ineffective. Troops were moved from one bunker to another, only to find follow-up strikes already waiting. Kamikaze units, their aircraft intended to terrorize and disrupt naval forces, were largely ineffective against the sustained aerial assault over land. The defenders were trapped in a cycle of destruction they could not escape. On the ground, chaos reigned.
Infantry units huddled in tunnels, emerging only to find their positions shattered, supplies destroyed, and communication lines severed. Entire villages were leveled in minutes. Streets, schools, and farms all were transformed into smoking rubble. The human cost was immense, yet each strike achieved a strategic purpose. Japanese resistance was being systematically broken without direct frontal assaults. American air crews noted the eerie calm that sometimes followed the explosions. The island, though still defended by tens of thousands of soldiers, was fragmented. Command structures were disrupted, coordination nearly impossible. The calculated application of precision bombing had rendered traditional defensive measures obsolete. Reports from the field described Japanese officers stunned by the speed and accuracy of the attacks, their morale faltering as the realization sank in. The sky itself had become the dominant battlefield. By early March, the pattern was undeniable. Okinawa was crippled before the ground forces even set foot in forceful engagement. The Americans had demonstrated that air power, applied with intelligence, technology, and precision, could achieve what months of conventional fighting might have required. The island's defenses were no longer a cohesive force, but a patchwork of shattered units and smoldering positions. The climax of the bombing campaign set the stage for the aftermath, where the consequences of this relentless air assault on soldiers, civilians, and the broader strategic picture would reshape the final stages of the Pacific War. March 1945. The smoke over Okinawa had not yet cleared, but the scale of devastation was unmistakable. Airfields lay in ruins, artillery positions had been neutralized, and Japanese defensive lines were fragmented. For the soldiers who survived the initial waves, the landscape was unrecognizable. Hills that once offered cover now bore the scars of repeated bomb strikes. Valleys were riddled with craters, and roads had been torn apart by high explosive ordnance. Communication lines, telephone poles, and supply caches were obliterated, leaving units isolated and vulnerable.
Civilians bore a tragic burden. Tens of thousands were displaced, sheltering in caves and makeshift shelters. Entire villages had vanished. Eyewitness accounts describe mothers clutching children amid smoldering ruins, men attempting to salvage food and water from debris, and the elderly wandering through ash-strewn streets, dazed by the scale of destruction. Hospitals were overwhelmed, often destroyed themselves, leaving medical personnel scrambling to treat the wounded with what little remained. The human toll was immense, a stark testament to the price of precision combined with overwhelming firepower. Japanese military assessments captured a sense of disbelief. Officers reported that the bombings had not only destroyed key positions, but had shattered morale. Coordination became impossible. The expected stalwart defense, reliant on fortified positions and natural terrain, was rendered moot. Soldiers trained for conventional ground engagements found themselves fighting an invisible enemy from the sky, one that anticipated their every move. Even kamikaze units poised to strike at invading naval forces were unable to alter the trajectory of events on land. On the American side, mission reports were both methodical and clinical. Bombing objectives had been achieved with remarkable efficiency. Airfields were rendered unusable, supply lines disrupted, and Japanese troop concentrations decimated. Minimal losses among bomber crews underscored the technological and tactical superiority of the United States' precision bombing doctrine. Commanders recorded that entire defensive clusters had been neutralized before ground forces were even deployed, a success that reshaped planning for the ensuing invasion. The immediate aftermath revealed a harsh truth. Okinawa's defenses were no longer a cohesive threat. The combination of advanced technology, strategic planning, and relentless execution had achieved its primary objective. Yet the human cost, the civilians caught in the crossfire, the shattered morale of Japanese defenders, would echo across the island long after the smoke cleared. This leads directly into Aftermath, Section 2, where the long-term impact, strategic consequences, and psychological effects are explored. By March 1945, the full consequences of the precision bombing on Okinawa were becoming clear. The destruction of airfields and supply depots had not only crippled immediate Japanese resistance, but also disrupted their ability to reinforce and resupply troops. Communications between commanders were fragmented, and many units were forced into isolated pockets, left to survive without coordination or direction. Strategically, Okinawa was no longer merely a fortified island, it had become a proving ground for the power of modern aerial warfare. The psychological impact on Japanese forces was profound. Lieutenant General Ushijima's reports described mounting despair among his troops. Soldiers accustomed to disciplined engagement found themselves facing an enemy who could strike anywhere at any time, turning the sky into a weapon and rendering entrenched positions vulnerable. Morale deteriorated rapidly. Even the most committed defenders realized that Okinawa, once considered a stronghold, had been compromised at its core. Civilian morale was equally shattered. The once bustling villages were reduced to ruins, and countless survivors faced hunger, disease, and the trauma of witnessing destruction on a scale that defied comprehension. For the Americans, the results validated their approach. Precision bombing had minimized the need for a prolonged frontal assault, preserving both ground troops and naval assets for the broader campaign. Mission reports lauded the effectiveness of B-29 formations, radar-guided targeting, and coordinated air-ground operations. The destruction achieved on Okinawa set a precedent for subsequent strikes against the Japanese home islands, demonstrating that well-planned aerial campaigns could achieve strategic objectives with surgical efficiency. The long-term consequences also extended beyond immediate military outcomes. Okinawa became a somber lesson in the evolution of warfare, where technological superiority could dictate both the pace and scale of destruction. The island's terrain, once a defensive advantage, had been rendered irrelevant against high-altitude precision strikes. Civilians and soldiers alike were confronted with the reality that war had entered a new era, one in which the sky itself could determine victory or annihilation. Yet, even amid devastation, the human spirit endured. Survivors began the painstaking process of recovery. Japanese officers documented what remained, attempting to reorganize scattered units and salvage what supplies they could. American planners turned their attention to the next objectives, confident that air supremacy combined with coordinated ground operations would shape the final stages of the Pacific War. The aftermath of Okinawa's aerial assault revealed more than shattered defenses. It revealed the profound impact of technology, strategy, and human endurance, a convergence that would resonate far beyond the island's burned-out hills.
Okinawa, once a quiet jewel of the Ryukyu Islands, had been transformed into a crucible of modern warfare. The precision of American bombers reshaped not only the island's landscape, but also the very nature of conflict. From the sky, destruction arrived with clinical exactness, sparing few structures, yet demonstrating the terrifying efficiency of technology and planning. The soldiers and civilians who endured it bore witness to a new reality. The battlefield was no longer confined to trenches, ridges, or fortifications. The air itself had become an instrument of power. The human cost was immense. Tens of thousands of lives were altered or ended. Families vanished, communities were fractured, and the psychological scars endured long after the smoke cleared. Yet within this devastation lay lessons in resilience. Survivors navigated the ruins, soldiers adapted to the chaos, and planners on both sides reflected on the evolving rules of war. Okinawa became a testament to both the ingenuity and the ruthlessness of human conflict. Strategically, the campaign showcased the decisive impact of precision bombing. It reshaped military doctrine, proving that technological superiority, coupled with meticulous planning, could achieve objectives that once required months of attrition. The Americans' ability to neutralize defenses from the sky altered the course of the Pacific War, setting a precedent for the strikes that would follow against Japan's home islands. In the quiet that eventually returned to Okinawa, the island itself became a symbol, a reminder that warfare had entered a new era where skies could dictate victory and human endurance was tested as never before. The devastation, while calculated, demanded reflection on the power of strategy, the limits of technology, and the cost borne by those caught in its shadow. Okinawa's story is not just one of bombs and fire. It is a story of human courage, calculated precision, and the enduring impact of decisions made far above the ground, where men in cockpits and rooms of maps shaped history from the clouds.